6 months later, Marcus stood on the observation deck of the archive ship Remembrance, watching Earth grow larger in the main viewport. The blue-white marble of humanity's homeworld looked peaceful from this distance, its swirling clouds hiding the bustling cities where 8 billion humans went about their lives, most still unaware of the larger forces moving through the galaxy. The ship around him buzzed with activity, as the largest diplomatic mission in galactic history prepared for first contact with Earth's government. Representatives from 63 species filled the corridors, each carrying formal documents recognizing humanity's restored status as a protector species. The cargo bays held technologies that had been held in trust for 15 millennia, waiting for this day. "Nervous?" asked a familiar voice behind him. Marcus turned to see Zika approaching, her blue skin showing the patterns of excitement mixed with concern. She wore the formal robes of an archive diplomat now, having been promoted after her role in recent events became public knowledge. Her grandmother, it turned out, had been right about the old stories. Terrified, Marcus admitted. What if they don't believe us? What if Earth's leaders decide they want no part of this? Then they would be fools, said another voice. Thorak emerged from the ship's command section, his massive form somehow managing to move silently despite his stone-like composition. The Corvan now wore the insignia of a Protectorate Fleet Admiral, a rank that had been specifically reactivated for him. But humans are not fools. Stubborn, yes. Reckless, certainly. But not fools. Through the viewport, Marcus could see smaller ships beginning to approach the Remembrance. Earth's hastily assembled first contact fleet looked primitive compared to the archive vessel, but they moved with careful precision that spoke well of human adaptability. "Have you decided what you're going to tell them?" Zika asked. Marcus had been struggling with that question for weeks. How do you explain to an entire species that they're the descendants of legendary warriors? How do you tell them that their ancestors saved the galaxy, then voluntarily gave up their power to heal from the trauma of war? "The truth," Marcus said finally. "All of it. They deserve to know what they're capable of and what's coming for them." The communication system crackled to life. "Archive Vessel Remembrance, this is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Earth Defense Fleet. Welcome to the Sol system. We're prepared to receive your diplomatic party." Marcus smiled despite his nervousness. Admiral Chen shared his last name, but they weren't related as far as he knew. Still, there was something reassuring about the firm confidence in her voice. Some things about humanity clearly hadn't changed. The transfer to Earth took another 3 hours, during which Marcus found himself at the center of dozens of conversations with alien diplomats who wanted to understand human psychology. How would Earth's leaders react to learning about the void spawn? Would they accept military alliance with species they'd never heard of? Could humanity adapt quickly enough to face the coming threats? Marcus had no good answers, but as their shuttle descended through Earth's atmosphere, he felt a growing sense of certainty that his species would rise to meet whatever challenges awaited them. It's what humans did. The landing site was New Geneva, the sprawling complex that housed Earth's unified government. As Marcus stepped off the shuttle, he breathed his homeworld's air for the first time in almost a year. It tasted like freedom and possibility, tinged with the industrial progress of a species reaching for the stars. The first contact ceremonies took place in a vast amphitheater designed for exactly this purpose. Earth's leaders had been preparing for eventual alien contact for decades, though none of them had expected it to come with such momentous revelations. Marcus found himself seated at the center of the human delegation, facing an array of world leaders who represented 8 billion people. Behind him, the alien ambassadors waited in respectful silence for humanity's response to everything they'd learned. President Martinez of the United Earth Council was the first to speak, after the formal presentations concluded. "So let me understand this correctly," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the amphitheater's acoustic systems. "Our species once fought a galactic war against entities called the Void Spawn. We won, but at terrible cost, so our ancestors chose isolation to recover. Now these entities are returning, and our former allies want to restore our ancient alliance." Chief Archive Keeper Zentar, who had made the journey to Earth specifically for this moment, nodded gravely. "That is correct, Madam President. The choice before your species is not whether to become involved in galactic affairs. The Void Spawn will find Earth eventually, as they find all worlds with intelligent life. The choice is whether humanity will face them alone or with the combined strength of 63 allied species." President Martinez looked directly at Marcus. "And you, Mr. Chen, triggered all of this by fighting a single creature to save one person?" Marcus stood, feeling the weight of history pressing down on him. "I didn't think about triggering anything, Madam President. I saw someone in danger and I acted. If that somehow revealed something important about humanity's nature, well, maybe that's what we needed to rediscover." The president was quiet for a long moment, studying the assembled alien delegation. When she spoke again, her voice carried the authority of someone making a decision that would reshape civilization. "The people of Earth have always believed that the measure of a society is how it treats those who cannot protect themselves. If our ancestors fought to protect other species from extinction, then they were acting according to our deepest values. And if those same threats are returning—" She stood, and her action was mirrored by every human in the amphitheater. "Then Earth accepts restoration to the Terran Protectorate. We will honor our ancestors' legacy and stand with our allies against the darkness." The alien delegation erupted in sounds of approval that ranged from musical trills to rumbling roars. But Marcus barely heard them. He was watching the faces of Earth's leaders, seeing the moment when humanity collectively chose to step back onto the galactic stage. Later, as the formal ceremonies gave way to technical discussions about fleet coordination and technology transfer, Marcus found himself alone on a balcony overlooking Lake Geneva. The setting sun painted the water gold, and in the distance, he could see the lights of the city beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk. Zika joined him, her skin showing the peaceful patterns of satisfaction and hope. "Do you think we're doing the right thing?" Marcus asked. "I think," she said thoughtfully, "that when I was trapped in that jungle, facing a creature that wanted to devour me, you didn't stop to calculate the odds or consider the consequences. You simply acted because it was right. Today your entire species made the same choice." She gestured toward the city lights, where 8 billion humans were going about their evening routines, most still unaware that their world had just rejoined a galactic civilization. "Tomorrow, the real work begins. Your people will need to learn technologies that have been preserved for 15,000 years. They'll need to train for battles that may not come for decades. They'll need to accept that they're no longer alone in the universe, and that with that knowledge comes responsibility." Marcus nodded, thinking about all the changes that lay ahead. "And the void spawn? We'll find that the galaxy is not as defenseless as they remember," Zika said with certainty. "The species they once terrorized have grown stronger in their absence, and their greatest enemies have returned, tempered by hardship but unbroken in spirit." As if summoned by their conversation, Thorak appeared in the balcony doorway. The massive Corvin held a communication device that pulsed with urgent signals. "The first joint patrol has encountered something," he reported. "A derelict ship of unknown origin, drifting in the outer system. The energy signatures match descriptions from the ancient archives." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. "Void spawn? A scout vessel, most likely. Dead for decades, but its presence confirms what we suspected. They've been probing our defenses, testing our readiness." Thorak's rocky features showed grim satisfaction, but this time they found us waiting. Marcus looked out at Earth's peaceful evening sky, knowing that somewhere beyond those stars, ancient enemies were stirring in the darkness between galaxies. But for the first time since that day in the jungle, he felt ready for whatever came next. Humanity had remembered what it meant to be guardians. The galaxy had remembered what it meant to have allies who would never yield, and somewhere in the vast cosmos the forces of darkness would soon learn that some flames burn brighter when challenged by shadow. The real fight was about to begin. But this time Earth would not stand alone. 3 days after Zentar's revelation, Marcus was released from the medical bay with his ribs healing nicely, and most of his contamination symptoms resolved. But the mining platform had transformed around him in ways that had nothing to do with his physical recovery. Workers, who had barely acknowledged his existence before, now stopped their tasks to nod respectfully when he passed. Conversations quieted when he entered rooms, and he often caught groups of aliens staring at him with expressions ranging from curiosity to something approaching reverence. It was deeply uncomfortable. "You're famous," Veltar informed him as he returned to his quarters. The young Zephyrian was waiting outside his door with what appeared to be a recording device. "Representatives from 17 different news networks have requested interviews. The Archive Council wants to formally recognize your actions And there's a delegation from the Corvin military asking to study your combat techniques. Marcus rubbed his temples, feeling a headache building. I just want to go back to work. That might be difficult, Veltar said apologetically. The platform administrator received orders from consortium headquarters. All human personnel are being reassigned to culturally significant positions. You're being transferred to the archive world of Melanos for historical consultation and protection. Protection from what? Veltar's fur rippled with nervousness. Apparently, news of what happened here has spread beyond the mining sector. Some species are concerned about the implications of human return to galactic affairs. There have been incidents. Marcus felt a cold knot form in his stomach. What kind of incidents? Before Veltar could answer, Thorak's massive form appeared in the corridor. The Corvin security chief moved with unusual urgency, his stone-like features showing more animation than Marcus had ever seen from his species. We need to talk, Thorak said without preamble. Privately. They walked to Thorak's security office in silence. Once inside, the Corvin activated a privacy field that would prevent electronic surveillance. When he spoke, his voice was lower than usual. 3 hours ago, a human transport was attacked near the Rigel shipping lanes, Thorak said. Pirates officially. But the ships used Devourer-class weaponry, and they specifically targeted human passengers. 47 dead. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. Someone's hunting humans? Multiple someones, Thorak confirmed. There's a faction within the consortium that believes human return to galactic prominence would upset the current balance of power. They call themselves the Stability Collective, and they've been growing in influence for decades. But humans aren't even a major political force yet. We barely have a dozen colonies. Thorak's rocky features shifted into what might have been a grimace. That's exactly why they want to act now. While your species is still vulnerable, the historical records that Zentar referenced aren't classified information. Anyone with archive access knows what humans accomplished against the Void Spawn. Some species see that as inspiration. Others see it as a threat. Marcus slumped in his chair, the weight of unintended consequences pressing down on him. So because I fought one monster to save one person, now my entire species is in danger? No, said a familiar voice from the doorway. Zika entered the office, her blue skin showing the confident patterns of someone who had made an important decision. Your species is in danger because darkness is returning to the galaxy, and there are those who would rather submit to it than fight. She moved to stand beside Marcus's chair. But there are others who remember the old alliances. Representatives from 43 worlds have petitioned the Archive Council to formally recognize the restoration of the Terran Protectorate. They want to offer your species full consortium membership and military support. What's the Terran Protectorate? Marcus asked. Thorak's expression brightened slightly. The mutual defense alliance that existed during the Void War. When humans fought to protect other species, those species pledged to protect humans in return. The treaty was never formally dissolved. It was simply dormant while your people recovered. Zika pulled up a holographic display showing star charts marked with various symbols. The Corvin Deep Guard has already begun deploying protective fleets around human colonies. The Altarian Science Directorate is sharing defensive technologies that have been held in trust for 15,000 years, and the Zephyrian Trade Network has blacklisted any organization that targets human shipping. Marcus studied the display, seeing patterns of movement that indicated massive military redeployment. This is happening because of what I did in the jungle? This is happening because of what your ancestors did against the Void Spawn, Thorak corrected. You simply reminded the galaxy that humans are still capable of impossible things. The rest was already set in motion by forces much larger than any individual. But, Zika added gently, your actions did provide the catalyst. When word spread of a human fighting a devourer barehanded, it forced everyone to choose sides. The Stability Collective revealed themselves by attacking human targets. Their opponents revealed themselves by moving to protect your species. Marcus stood and walked to the window that overlooked the mining platform. Below he could see workers from a dozen species going about their daily tasks, but now he noticed things he'd missed before, the way different species clustered together, the subtle tension in their movements, the watchful poses of security personnel. What happens next? He asked. That depends partly on you, Thorak said. The Archive Council wants to interview you, to understand how much humans remember of their own history. The military commands want to assess human combat capabilities, and there are diplomatic missions being planned to establish formal contact with Earth's government. And the Stability Collective? Zika's skin patterns darkened with anger. They've made their intentions clear. They believe the galaxy is better off without human influence, and they're willing to use force to ensure your species remains isolated. But they underestimate both human resilience and the loyalty of your old allies. Marcus thought about Earth, about the billions of humans who had no idea that their species had once been the galaxy's guardians. They were living peaceful lives, focused on rebuilding their world and reaching for the stars with the wonder of explorers rather than the grimness of warriors. Do they have a choice? Marcus asked. Humanity, I mean. Can we stay out of this if we want to? Thorak's massive head moved in what Marcus had learned was the Corvan equivalent of a shrug. The darkness doesn't care what humans want. If the Void Spawn return in full force, they'll target Earth just as they targeted it before. Isolation won't protect your species this time. But, Zika said with certainty in her voice, this time humans won't have to face the darkness alone. The galaxy owes a debt that's 15,000 years overdue, and there are many of us who would rather die fighting beside humans than live kneeling to shadows. Marcus turned back to his friends. Because that's what they were, he realized. Despite the differences in their species, despite the vast implications of recent events, they were his friends who wanted to help him understand an impossible situation. I need to contact Earth, Marcus said finally. My government needs to know what's coming. They need to understand that the choice isn't whether to get involved in galactic affairs, it's whether to face the coming storm with allies or alone. Thorak nodded approvingly. The Archive Council has prepared a complete historical briefing for your leaders. They're also offering to send diplomatic envoys to help explain the situation. And in the meantime? Marcus asked. Zika's patterns shifted to show determination mixed with hope. In the meantime, the galaxy remembers what it means to have guardians who refuse to yield. And we prepare for whatever comes next. Chief Archive Keeper Zentar moved with the careful dignity of extreme age, but his voice carried the strength of absolute authority. The medical bay had become an impromptu gathering hall as more workers squeezed inside to hear what the legendary keeper had to say. Even Marcus, despite his injuries, found himself sitting up straighter in the presence of such ancient wisdom. 15,000 years ago, Zentar began, his silvered skin showing patterns that indicated he was accessing deep memories. Before the Galactic Consortium existed, before most of our species had learned to travel between stars, the galaxy was a much darker place. He gestured to Zika, who moved closer to stand beside Marcus's medical bed. You spoke of the old stories, child. The tales your grandmother told of warriors who would not yield to the darkness. Those stories are not mythology. They are history. The gathered crowd exchanged glances. Representatives from a dozen species, Altarians, Zephyrians, Corvans, and others Marcus didn't recognize, all seemed to know something that Marcus did not. In those ancient days, Zentar continued, the galaxy was plagued by creatures far worse than devourers, beings of pure malice that consumed entire worlds, leaving behind nothing but lifeless rock. They were called the Void Spawn, and they seemed unstoppable. Wherever they appeared, civilizations fell. The old Altarian's eyes fixed on Marcus with unsettling intensity. The first species to truly resist them were called the Terrans. They were small, soft-bodied creatures with no natural weapons and fragile lives that ended far too quickly. By every measure of galactic civilization, they should have been among the first to fall to the darkness. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with his injuries. Terrans, he repeated slowly. That's an old name for humans. Indeed, Zentar nodded. Your species has forgotten much of its own history. The records were lost during what you call the Dark Ages on your homeworld. But other species remember. Thorak stepped forward, his massive form blocking out some of the medical bay's lighting. The stories say that when the Void Spawn reached the Terran homeworld, something unprecedented happened. Instead of fleeing or hiding, the Terrans fought back. Not with advanced weapons or overwhelming numbers, but with something the Void Spawn had never encountered before. What? Marcus asked, though part of him already suspected the answer. Pure stubbornness, said Veltar from the back of the crowd. Refusal to accept defeat even when defeat was inevitable. The stories say that Terrans would fight with broken weapons, fight when outnumbered 1,000 to 1, fight even when they were dying. And somehow, impossibly, they began to win. Zentar's skin patterns shifted to show approval. The void spawn were creatures of despair. They fed on the surrender of their enemies, grew stronger when others accepted defeat. But the Terrans would not surrender. Even when their cities burned and their fleets were scattered, they kept fighting. And their refusal to yield became a beacon that inspired other species to resist. The medical bay had become so quiet that Marcus could hear his own heartbeat in the silence. Around him, dozens of alien faces watched with expressions of reverence and awe. The war lasted 3 centuries, Zentar continued. In the end, the void spawn were not destroyed, but they were driven back into the dark spaces between galaxies. And it was Terran determination that made victory possible. Your species paid a terrible price. Their homeworld was devastated, their population reduced to a fraction of what it had been. But they had saved not just themselves, but all of galactic civilization. Marcus struggled to process what he was hearing. But that doesn't make sense. Humans only discovered faster than light travel 20 years ago. We're new to the galaxy. Your species discovered faster than light travel for the second time 20 years ago, Zentar corrected gently. After the war, the surviving Terrans chose to isolate themselves. They destroyed their star charts, dismantled their fleets, and withdrew to their damaged homeworld. They said they needed time to heal, time to remember what it meant to live rather than fight. The ancient Altarian moved closer to Marcus's bedside, but the other species never forgot what the Terrans had done. We established the archive to preserve the memory of their sacrifice, and we watched, we waited, because the prophecy said that when the darkness began to stir again, the Terrans would return. The Devourers, Thorak said, his voice barely above a whisper. They're not just predators. They're scouts, advance agents for something worse. Zentar nodded gravely. The void spawn are stirring in the outer darkness. Not in full force, not yet, but their influence grows stronger each year. The Devourers appear more frequently, testing our defenses, probing for weakness. Other dark things move in the deep spaces, creatures that should not exist, ships that sail between realities. Marcus felt the weight of generations pressing down on him. And you think, what? That I'm some kind of chosen one? That what happened in the jungle was destiny? No, Zentar said with a slight smile. I think you are exactly what you appear to be. A human being who refused to let an innocent die on his watch. But that refusal, that absolute determination to protect others even at the cost of your own life, that is the flame your ancestors carried, the fire that burns without consuming. Zika spoke up from beside his bed. When I saw you fight the Devourer, I knew the stories were true. No rational being challenges such a creature with bare hands. But you didn't think about rationality. You only thought about duty. I thought about not letting a kid get eaten by a monster, Marcus protested. Yes, Zentar said. Exactly. That is what makes your species so dangerous to the forces of darkness. You do not calculate odds or measure consequences when something you protect is threatened. You simply act. The old Altarian turned to address the crowd that had gathered. Send word to the archive worlds. Tell them that the prophecy has begun to fulfill itself. The Terrans have returned to the stars, and they are still what they always were, guardians who will not yield. As the crowd began to disperse, buzzing with excitement and whispered conversations, Zentar remained beside Marcus's bed. What happens now? Marcus asked. Now you heal, the archive keeper said. And then you continue being exactly what you are. The galaxy does not need you to be anything more than human, Marcus Chen. That has always been enough. As Zentar prepared to leave, Marcus called out one last question. The prophecy you mentioned, what exactly does it say? The ancient Altarian paused in the doorway, his silvered skin showing patterns of both hope and sorrow. It says that when the darkness returns, the Terrans will rise again. But it also says that this time they will not stand alone. Other species will remember what courage looks like, and they will choose to stand beside them. He looked back at the medical bay, where representatives from a dozen different worlds had just witnessed something they thought impossible. I believe, Zentar said quietly, that part of the prophecy has already begun. The journey back to the mining platform took twice as long as Marcus's trip into the jungle. His injuries made every step painful, and Zika was still shaking from her encounter with the Devourer. They moved slowly through the alien forest, helping each other over fallen logs and through patches of thick undergrowth. Marcus's suit was barely functioning. The life support system wheezed and clicked with each breath, and several warning lights flashed red on his helmet display. The creature's claws had torn through the outer layer of his protective gear, and alien atmosphere was slowly seeping into his air supply. He had maybe 30 minutes before the contamination reached dangerous levels. "Tell me about these stories," Marcus said as they paused to rest beside a phosphorescent stream. He was trying to keep Zika talking, both to distract her from the trauma and to keep himself focused on something other than the growing pain in his chest. Zika's blue skin rippled with patterns that Marcus had learned indicated deep thought. "They are old stories from before my people reached the stars. In those days, we believed that the universe was full of dark things that wanted to devour all light and life. Most beings would hide from these creatures or flee to distant worlds." She paused to help Marcus cross the stream, her forearms easily supporting his weight. "But the story spoke of a race of warriors who would not run. They had no claws, no armor, no natural weapons, but they possessed something that made them stronger than any predator. The stories called it the fire that burns without consuming, a flame in their hearts that grew brighter when faced with darkness." Marcus coughed, tasting blood. "Sounds like someone had a good imagination." "Perhaps," Zika said. "But my grandmother always insisted the stories were true. She said that someday when the darkness grew too strong, the warriors would return. She said we would know them by their deeds, not their appearance." They reached the edge of the energy barrier just as Marcus's air supply finally gave out. He stumbled through the barrier threshold and collapsed onto the platform's metal deck, gasping in the filtered atmosphere he'd taken for granted just hours before. The platform erupted in chaos. Workers from a dozen species dropped what they were doing and rushed toward them. Medical technicians appeared with scanning equipment and emergency supplies. Someone was shouting orders in 3 different languages. Through the confusion, Marcus saw Thorak pushing through the crowd. The massive Corvin security chief knelt beside them, his rocky features showing more emotion than Marcus had ever seen from his species. "The Devourer?" Thorak asked simply. "Dead," Marcus managed between labored breaths. Thorak's stone-like skin shifted to a lighter shade, the Corvin equivalent of surprise. "You killed a Devourer? With what weapons?" Before Marcus could answer, Kessitar arrived with the medical team. The Altarian engineer was speaking rapidly to the medics while examining Zika for injuries. His skin showed the deep blue patterns that indicated profound relief mixed with disbelief. "Get him to the medical bay," one of the medics said. "Possible internal bleeding, contamination exposure, multiple lacerations." "How long was he in the jungle atmosphere?" "Too long," Marcus said, trying to sit up. The effort made his vision blur, and he decided that lying down was a better idea. As they lifted him onto a medical stretcher, Marcus caught sight of the crowd that had gathered. Representatives from every species on the platform were there, watching him with expressions he couldn't quite interpret. Some looked amazed, others skeptical, and a few seemed almost frightened. The medical bay was a sterile contrast to the jungle's chaotic life. Marcus submitted to the medics' examinations, letting them scan and poke and inject him with various healing compounds. The Altarian doctor was efficient and professional, but Marcus could see questions in her large eyes. "The injuries are consistent with combat against a large predator," she reported to Thorak. "Claw marks, blunt force trauma, chemical burns from acidic saliva. But there are also wounds on his hands that suggest he inflicted damage on something with his bare skin." "That's impossible," said another voice from the doorway. Marcus turned to see Veltar, the young Zephyrian who had first alerted them to Zika's disappearance. Her normally smooth fur was standing on end with agitation. "Devourers have armor plating that can withstand plasma weapons. No organic tissue can penetrate their defenses. Then how do you explain this?" The doctor held up a scanner showing Marcus's hands. The display revealed traces of bioluminescent compounds embedded under his fingernails, the same compounds that flowed through Devourer nerve clusters. The room fell silent. Outside the medical bay, Marcus could hear more voices gathering. Word was spreading through the platform, and it seemed like everyone wanted to see the human who had done the impossible. Zika appeared in the doorway, her blue skin now showing the steady patterns that indicated she had recovered from her shock. She carried something in her hands, a sample container filled with dark metallic scales. I gathered these from the creature's body, she said quietly. As proof, Thorak examined the scales, his rocky features betraying no emotion. But Marcus noticed that the security chief's massive hands were trembling slightly as he held the evidence. These are Devourer armor plates, Thorak confirmed. Fresh, still carrying bioelectric residue. He looked at Marcus with something approaching awe. In 300 years of galactic civilization, no one has ever killed a Devourer in single combat. Many have tried. All have died. I got lucky, Marcus said, though even as he spoke the words he knew they weren't entirely true. Luck might have played a part, but something else had driven him into that jungle and given him the strength to fight a creature that outweighed him 50-1. No, said a new voice from the corridor. Luck had nothing to do with it. The crowd in the medical bay turned to see an elderly Altarian making his way through the gathered workers. Marcus had never seen this individual before, but the way others stepped aside suggested he was someone important. The newcomer was ancient even by Altarian standards. His blue skin faded to pale silver and marked with intricate patterns that spoke of great age and wisdom. He approached Marcus's medical bed and studied him with eyes that seemed to hold the weight of centuries. I am Chief Archive Keeper Zentar, the elder said. I have come to hear the story of what happened in the jungle, but more importantly, I have come to share a story of my own. The medical bay had become completely silent. Even the platform's background hum seemed muted in the presence of the ancient Altarian. For you see, Zentar continued, what happened today was not chance, it was prophecy. Marcus had exactly 3 seconds to find a handhold before the Devourer tried to shake him off like a troublesome insect. The creature's armor plates were smooth and offered little grip, but there were gaps between them where softer tissue showed through. Marcus jammed his fingers into one of these gaps and held on as the beast went into a frenzy. The Devourer bucked and twisted, slamming itself against trees in an attempt to scrape Marcus off its back. Each impact sent shockwaves through his body, but his grip held. The creature's hide was hot to the touch, and Marcus could feel the powerful muscles moving beneath the armor plates. But holding on wasn't enough. The creature would eventually succeed in dislodging him, and then he'd be back on the ground facing those terrible teeth. Marcus needed to find a way to hurt it, to make it think twice about continuing this fight. He worked his way forward along the creature's spine, using the gaps between armor plates as handholds. The Devourer's movements became more violent as it realized what he was doing. It rolled onto its back, trying to crush him against the ground. But Marcus held his breath and endured the crushing weight until the creature rolled upright again. Near what he assumed was the creature's head, Marcus found what he was looking for. The armor plates were smaller here, and there was a gap that revealed something that might have been a nerve cluster. It pulsed with blue-green light, and the surrounding tissue was softer than the rest of the creature's hide. Marcus pulled his multi-tool from his belt. The device wasn't designed as a weapon, but it had a sharp probe that he used for precision work on mining equipment. He raised the tool and drove it down into the nerve cluster with all his strength. The Devourer's roar shook the entire clearing. It reared up on its hind legs, clawing at the air, and Marcus felt himself sliding backward down its spine. He grabbed for another handhold, but the creature's movements were too violent. He tumbled off its back and hit the ground hard enough to knock the wind out of his lungs. The Devourer spun around to face him, and Marcus could see that his attack had done some damage. The nerve cluster was leaking glowing fluid, and the creature's movements were less coordinated than before. But it was still very much alive, and now it was truly angry. Marcus rolled to his feet and looked around for his dropped branch. The wood had splintered when the creature stepped on it during its bucking fit. There were scattered rocks and debris, but nothing that would serve as an effective weapon against something that size. The Devourer approached more cautiously now. It had learned that the small human was more dangerous than he appeared. Its head weaved back and forth as it tried to predict which direction Marcus would dodge. Marcus picked up 2 fist-sized rocks and backed toward the edge of the clearing. Behind the creature, he could see Zika still pressed against her tree. The young Altarian was watching the fight with a mixture of terror and amazement. No one had ever fought a Devourer hand-to-hand and survived. The creature lunged again, and this time Marcus was ready. He threw himself to the side at the last possible moment, hurling one of his rocks directly into the creature's open mouth. The rock struck something important inside that terrible maw, and the Devourer gagged and stumbled. Marcus didn't waste the opportunity. He sprinted toward the creature's side and drove his remaining rock into another gap in the armor, this one near what might have been a lung or breathing organ. The rock disappeared into the creature's body, and the devourer's breathing became labored and wheezing, but the effort cost him. One of the creature's massive claws caught him across the chest, sending him flying into a tree trunk. Marcus felt something crack in his ribs, and his suit's emergency medical system started beeping warnings about possible internal injuries. The devourer pressed its advantage, charging toward the downed human with murder in its movements. But Marcus had noticed something during the fight. The creature's armor plates weren't just protective, they were also its weakness. They overlapped in a specific pattern that left certain areas vulnerable when the creature moved in particular ways. As the devourer bore down on him, Marcus waited until the last possible second, then threw himself directly at the creature's front legs. The move was suicidal by any rational measure, but Marcus had stopped thinking rationally several minutes ago. He was operating on pure instinct and adrenaline. He slammed into the creature's leg joints just as it was shifting its weight for another attack. The timing was perfect. The devourer's legs tangled together, and the massive predator crashed to the ground with earth-shaking force. Marcus was on top of it before it could recover. He climbed onto the creature's head, avoiding the snapping jaws, and found the injury he'd made earlier with his multi-tool. The nerve cluster was still leaking and the surrounding tissue was swollen and inflamed. Without hesitation, Marcus drove his bare hands into the wound. The sensation was indescribable. The creature's nerve tissue was hot and electric, sending shocks up Marcus's arms that made his muscles spasm. But he ignored the pain and dug deeper, tearing at delicate structures that no creature could survive without. The devourer thrashed beneath him, but its movements were becoming weaker. Marcus could feel its life force ebbing as he destroyed critical nerve pathways. It was brutal, primitive, and completely effective. Finally, the creature went still. Its breathing slowed, then stopped entirely. The glow from its teeth faded to darkness, and the terrible intelligence behind its eyeless gaze disappeared forever. Marcus rolled off the dead predator and lay on his back, staring up at the alien canopy. His hands were covered in luminescent blue blood, and his suit was reporting multiple system failures. His ribs felt like they were on fire and he could taste blood in his mouth. But he was alive. And more importantly, so was Zika. The young Altarian approached cautiously, her eyes wide with disbelief. She knelt beside Marcus and began speaking in her native language, words tumbling over each other in rapid succession. Marcus's translator was damaged, but he caught fragments, words like impossible and legend and sacred. "Are you hurt?" Marcus managed to ask, his voice hoarse from breathing the alien atmosphere. Zika switched to Standard Galactic, the trade language that all spacefaring species learned. "I am unharmed. But you, how did you do this? No being fights a devourer with bare hands. It is not possible." Marcus struggled to sit up, wincing as his injured ribs protested. "Apparently it is possible. Stupid, but possible." He looked at the dead creature, its massive form already beginning to attract scavenger insects from the jungle. The fight had lasted maybe 10 minutes, but it felt like hours. Every muscle in his body ached, and his suit's medical systems were still cataloging injuries. "We need to get back to the platform," Marcus said. "Can you walk?" Zika nodded, but she didn't move immediately. Instead, she stared at Marcus with an expression he couldn't quite read. There was gratitude there, certainly, but something else as well. Something like awe. "My people have stories," she said quietly. "Ancient stories about beings who fight the dark things that live between the stars. Warriors who do not yield even when death seems certain. We thought they were just myths." Marcus managed a weak smile. "Maybe they are. Or maybe sometimes ordinary people just do what needs to be done." They helped each other to their feet and began the slow journey back to the mining platform. Behind them, the jungle was already beginning to reclaim the clearing where an impossible battle had taken place. But the memory of what happened there would last much longer than the evidence. The jungle hit Marcus like a living wall the moment he stepped beyond the barrier. The filtered air of the mining platform gave way to thick humidity that made every breath feel like drinking soup. His suit's air recycler kicked in immediately, but he could already taste the metallic tang of alien atmosphere seeping through the seals. The ground beneath his feet was spongy with decades of rotting vegetation. Strange fungi glowed with phosphorescent light between the massive tree trunks, and overhead, the canopy was so thick that very little of Xerion Prime's orange sunlight reached the forest floor. Everything was shadows and dim, colored light. Marcus activated his scanner and followed Zika's signal. The device beeped softly as it tracked her emergency transponder, but the jungle interfered with the readings. Sometimes the signal seemed close, sometimes far away. The thick vegetation played tricks with electromagnetic waves. He pushed through hanging vines that felt like wet leather against his suit. Some of them moved when he touched them, pulling away or curling around his arms before he could shake them off. The jungle was full of sounds, clicking, chittering, roaring in the distance, and a constant background hum that might have been insects or might have been something else entirely. 20 minutes into the jungle, Marcus heard the first howl. It came from somewhere ahead of him, in the same direction as Zika's signal. The sound was unlike anything he'd ever heard. Part roar, part whistle, with harmonics that made his teeth ache. Whatever made that noise was big, and it was angry. Marcus picked up his pace, crashing through undergrowth that grabbed at his legs and arms. His scanner showed Zika's position was just ahead, past a small clearing where the trees opened up enough to let in more light. When he reached the edge of the clearing, Marcus froze. Zika was there, but she wasn't collecting mineral samples. She was pressed against the base of an enormous tree, her blue skin almost white with terror. Her sample container lay scattered nearby, spilling its contents across the forest floor. Between Zika and the rest of the clearing stood something that made Marcus's blood run cold. The creature was roughly the size of a small shuttle, maybe 10 meters long and half that wide. Its body was covered in overlapping plates that looked like black metal, but they shifted and moved like living armor. 6 legs held it up off the ground, each one ending in claws that dug furrows in the earth. But it was the head that made Marcus's skin crawl. The thing had no eyes that he could see, but its skull was elongated and filled with rows of teeth that glowed with their own pale light. As it moved, those teeth clicked together in a rhythm that might have been communication or might have been a dinner song. Acidic drool dripped from its mouth, hissing where it hit the ground. This was a Devour-class predator. Marcus had seen pictures in the safety briefings, but the reality was worse than any photograph. These things were apex predators on dozens of worlds, capable of chewing through starship hulls and surviving in the vacuum of space. They were intelligent, aggressive, and nearly impossible to kill with conventional weapons, and this one was stalking Zika like a cat playing with a mouse. The creature moved in slow circles around the tree where Zika was hiding. It wasn't in a hurry. It knew she couldn't escape, and it was savoring the fear. Every few seconds it would let out another one of those bone-shaking howls, and Zika would press herself tighter against the bark. Marcus's scanner showed no other life signs in the immediate area. It was just him, the girl, and the monster. His suit's emergency beacon was still active, so the people back at the platform would know where he was, but help was hours away. By then, there would be nothing left to rescue. He looked around the clearing for anything that might be useful. There were fallen branches, some loose rocks, and scattered mineral samples from Zika's collection kit. Nothing that would make a dent in a creature that could survive plasma rifle fire. The Devourer noticed him then. Its head swiveled in his direction, and Marcus could feel intelligence behind that eyeless gaze. The creature stopped its circling and stood perfectly still, as if it was trying to decide whether this new arrival was food, threat, or entertainment. For a long moment, human and alien predators studied each other across the clearing. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat in his ears, and his hands were steady, despite the adrenaline flooding his system. He'd been in dangerous situations before. Equipment failures in space, mining accidents, systems crashes that could have killed everyone on a platform. But this was different. This wasn't a problem he could fix with engineering skills and stubborn determination. The Devourer made its decision. It turned away from Zika and began walking toward Marcus, each step deliberate and menacing. Its claws left deep gouges in the earth, and the acidic drool sizzled where it fell. Marcus backed up a step, then stopped. If he ran, the creature would chase him, and then it would return to finish what it started with Zika. There was nowhere to go anyway. The jungle was the creature's territory, and it knew every path and hiding place. "Hey," Marcus shouted, raising his arms to make himself look bigger. "Over here, ugly." The Devourer paused, tilting its head as if considering this strange behavior. Then it resumed its approach, moving faster now. Its teeth began clicking in a rapid rhythm that sounded almost like laughter. Marcus grabbed a fallen branch and hefted it like a club. The wood was dense and heavy, but it felt fragile in his hands. Against the creature's armored hide, it would be like fighting a tank with a toothpick. Behind the devourer, he could see Zika watching with wide eyes. She was making small sounds of distress, but she hadn't run away. Maybe she was too frightened to move. Or maybe she understood that running would just attract the creature's attention again. The devourer was close enough now that Marcus could smell it. A combination of rotting meat, ozone, and something chemical that burned his nostrils even through his suit's filters. The creature's plates shifted and realigned as it prepared to attack, and its mouth opened wide enough to bite Marcus in half. Marcus gripped the branch tighter and tried to remember everything he'd ever learned about fighting. He'd taken martial arts classes as a kid, and he'd been in a few bar fights during his younger days. But those experiences seemed laughably inadequate now. The creature lunged forward with shocking speed, its massive jaws snapping closed where Marcus's head had been a split second before. He rolled to the side, swinging the branch at the creature's leg. The wood connected with an impact that jarred his arms, but the creature barely seemed to notice. A massive claw swept toward him, and Marcus threw himself backward. The claw whistled through the air where he'd been standing, and Marcus realized that the creature was playing with him too. It could have killed him already if it wanted to. Instead, it was testing him, learning how he moved and how he fought. That meant it was intelligent enough to strategize, which also meant it was intelligent enough to make mistakes. Marcus circled around a large boulder, keeping it between himself and the devourer. The creature followed, its plates clicking as they adjusted for movement. But it was moving predictably now, following the path of least resistance around the rock. "That's right," Marcus muttered, backing toward the edge of the clearing. "Come and get me," the devourer charged, and Marcus sprinted toward the tree where Zika was hiding. For a moment it looked like he was abandoning her, leading the monster straight to its original prey. But at the last second, Marcus grabbed a low-hanging vine and swung himself up and over the creature's head. He landed hard on the devourer's back, between two of the larger armor plates. The creature roared in surprise and fury, twisting and bucking like an angry bull. Marcus wrapped his arms around what might have been a neck and held on for his life. The real fight was about to begin. Marcus Chen wiped the sweat from his forehead as he adjusted the fusion couplers on the mining platform. 3 months into his contract on Xerion Prime, and he still wasn't used to the planet's thick atmosphere. The air tasted like copper pennies and made his lungs work harder than they should. But the pay was good, and Earth needed every credit it could get from the Galactic Mining Consortium. The platform hummed beneath his boots, a steady vibration that told him the extractors were working properly. Around him, dozens of other species worked the same shifts. Tall, blue-skinned Altarians with their forearms making quick work of heavy machinery, small furry Zephyrians who could squeeze into tight spaces, and the occasional Corvin with their rock-like hide that let them work in areas too dangerous for softer beings. Marcus was one of only 3 humans on the entire operation. Humans were still new to galactic society, barely 2 decades since first contact. Most species saw them as weak, fragile creatures who broke too easily and died too quickly. The job postings for humans usually came with warnings about atmospheric composition, gravity differences, and radiation levels that would kill them in hours. But Marcus had learned something that the other species hadn't figured out yet. Humans might be fragile, but they were also stubborn. When everything else broke down, when the equipment failed and the backup systems crashed, humans kept working. They found ways to make things function with spare parts and determination. That's exactly what he was doing now. The primary atmospheric processor had failed during the night shift, and the Altarian supervisor was ready to shut down the entire section until replacement parts arrived from the nearest space station. That would take 6 weeks and cost the company millions of credits. Marcus had spent the morning crawling through maintenance tunnels, rewiring systems that weren't designed to work together, and jury-rigging connections that should have been impossible. His hands were cut up from sharp metal edges and his jumpsuit was soaked with coolant fluid that stung his skin. But the atmospheric processor was running again. "Incredible," said a voice behind him. Marcus turned to see Kesitar, one of the Altarian engineers. His blue skin had a surprised pattern of darker spots that indicated amazement. "The readings show full functionality. How did you make incompatible systems work together?" Marcus shrugged. Sometimes you just have to convince machines to do what they don't want to do. He didn't mention that he'd had to bypass 3 safety protocols and ignore 2 warning systems that kept screaming about imminent failure. The setup would hold for maybe a week, but that was long enough for proper parts to arrive. The afternoon shift was quieter. Marcus was checking mineral extraction rates when he heard shouting from the perimeter. The mining platform was surrounded by an energy barrier that kept out the local wildlife, but sometimes smaller creatures found ways through. Usually it was just a matter of stunning them and relocating them outside the barrier. But this shouting sounded different, urgent, afraid. Marcus grabbed his scanner and headed toward the commotion. A crowd had gathered near the eastern edge of the platform, where the barrier generators created a slight gap for the material transport tubes. Through the gap, Marcus could see movement in the thick jungle beyond. "What's happening?" he asked Veltar, a young Zephyrian who worked in material sorting. "It's Zika," Veltar said, her fur standing on end with worry. She went outside the barrier to collect mineral samples. The security sensors detected movement in her area, but she's not responding to communication. Marcus knew Zika. She was barely more than a child by Altarian standards, maybe equivalent to a human teenager. She was curious about everything and often volunteered for tasks that others considered boring or dangerous. Her supervisor was Kessitar, who was currently arguing with the security chief about sending out a search party. "The barrier stays up," the security chief was saying. His name was Thorak, a massive Corvan whose stone-like skin made him look like a walking boulder. "Protocol is clear. No one goes outside the barrier during animal migration season." "But she's just a child," Kessitar protested. "She doesn't understand the dangers." "Then she shouldn't have left the platform," Thorak replied. "We wait for the mobile security unit. It will arrive in 4 hours. Marcus looked at his scanner. Zika's tracking signal was still active, but it wasn't moving. That could mean she was hiding, injured, or worse. 4 hours was a long time to wait when someone might be in trouble. The crowd was growing larger as word spread through the platform. Other Altarians were arriving, their skin showing the stress patterns that indicated fear and helplessness. A few Zephyrians had climbed onto machinery to get a better view of the jungle. Even some of the normally stoic Corvans seemed concerned. Marcus studied the scanner display. Zika's position was about half a kilometer into the jungle, near a mineral outcropping that was known to contain rare elements. The path to reach her would take him through thick vegetation and across a small river that the local animals used as a water source. "I'm going after her," Marcus announced. The crowd turned to stare at him. Thorak's rocky features shifted into what might have been surprise. "Human, you will not survive 10 minutes in that jungle. The atmosphere is toxic to your species at ground level, and the wildlife includes predators that could kill you with a single bite." "Maybe," Marcus said, checking his emergency air supply. He had about 2 hours of filtered air in his suit's recycling system. "But I'm not going to stand here and wait while someone dies." He walked toward the barrier gap, ignoring the protest from the crowd. Kester caught up with him at the edge of the platform. "Marcus, this is madness. The jungle contains creatures that even Corvans fear. You have no weapons, no armor, no experience with xenobiology." Marcus paused at the barrier threshold. Beyond the energy field, the jungle was dark and alive with sounds he didn't recognize. The air shimmered with humidity and alien pollen. It looked like the kind of place where humans weren't supposed to go. "Yeah," he said, stepping through the barrier. "But someone has to try."